Will Utah football be able to keep their home winning streak alive in 2023? We're talking about it on today's
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you guys like and subscribe. We appreciate all of you who support our show and listen to us every single day. On today's show, we are going to be talking about Cole Bishop potentially having another outstanding season, a little thing on Utah Gymnastics, who took a trip over to South Korea as well. But first, we got to start with talking about Utah's home winning streak. And in order to help us to do that, it's friend of the show in KSL Sports Michelle Bodkin. And Michelle, Utah's winning streak at home has been incredible. It currently sits at 14 straight home games overall, which trails only Alabama, Georgia, and Michigan, who Alabama's up in the 20s, Georgia 18, Michigan 15, Utah currently at 14. But if you take away the COVID season, which especially in the Pac-12 was just a messy, kind of just weird, clunky piece of the equation, that streak actually extends even farther because Utah hasn't lost a home game since September of 2018, a true home game, because what makes Rice Eccles Stadium so tough to play at is not just the altitude, of course, but especially the fans and how loud it gets on third down. And actually, I believe at the time we're recording this on Wednesday, you Michelle, posted on Instagram just a reminder of that when Cam Rising powered in the 2-point conversion, like one of the loudest we've ever heard that type of stadium get, but we've seen on third and fourth downs, or like a Britton Covey return versus Oregon comes to mind, just how crazy and loud it can get. It's one of the best atmospheres in the West when it comes to college football overall. So can Utah stay perfect at home in 2023? We'll dive into some of the individual matchups in a little bit, but just starting off in general, I say absolutely yes. They have one really tough game to me at home, a couple other games where I'm like, yeah, I could see them losing to that. But to me, what makes Utah's 2023 schedule so challenging is more the road games than anything else. Going to Washington, going to Oregon State, going to USC are probably their three toughest games on the schedule overall in conference play. The Baylor one will also factor into that somewhere. But to me, I definitely think this Utah team can stay perfect at home this fall.
Yeah, I had to do a quick scan of what the schedule was again, and I agree with you. There's only one game that I'm like, that maybe could be tough. And of course, I think we all know we're talking about Oregon when Oregon comes to visit, and especially since they'll be coming off of USC the week prior. It just, that's going to be another high emotional game. And
very good point.
Sometimes having those back to back, regardless of whether it's home or away, can trip teams up. So, I mean, we'll see. The good news is this team is pretty experienced, and there's not really a lot they haven't seen at this point. And so I do expect some veteran leadership, provided that there's no serious crazy injuries. Senior leadership, I think, should kind of pretty well take care of that and keep guys focused and eyes on the prize, full steam ahead sort of thing. You never know. I mean, the outlier, of course, is always going to be, what's everybody else doing. I think we have a pretty good idea of what Utah's doing and what Utah brings to the table, what the atmosphere is going to be like, this season, because it hasn't changed in probably since Urban Meyer really got people believing in 2004. It's just always been a great atmosphere from there. But as far as, what other people bring, you kind of find that out as you go along, and it doesn't matter how well you try and research that or understand that. You just kind of don't know until you see it for yourself. So I would agree with you. I think I like Utah's odds of staying undefeated at home, but I mean, there's always potential. So
there definitely is. And I think you mentioned it. The main one, when you look at if I was told by someone in the future that Utah lost a home game and you have to guess which one it was, I would look to the Oregon game, of course. And you make a great point, not just in what Oregon obviously is, which is the potential to be a top 10 team in college football, but after Utah's coming off the USC game. And if Utah were to beat USC in a similar fashion that they did last year, a final minute dramatic win in just an unbelievable fashion, everyone going crazy, going nuts, it's hard to hit the reset button and go into the next week and then just there's oftentimes a letdown that falls into that. It's happened at every level of football, but from high school, college to pro. No one is able to really figure that aspect out. We see it happen to teams time and time again. Now, sometimes they are able to avoid that, but even though teams know what they need to do to reset, we've still seen it carry into and factor over. And it'll be interesting to see too, if Utah does lose to USC, there's potential that one loss can fall into two. That's not something that's happened to this Utah football team per se, but it's happened to other teams as well. But when you look at this Oregon team, you're talking about Bo Nix, you're talking about a defense in its second year under Dan Lanning that should still be pretty good, especially after struggling to get after the quarterback last year. That's something I expect them to do a lot better. Lost some players along the offensive line, especially on the interior up front, but this is Oregon football. They're going to have offensive linemen out there ready to go. They even got a Texas guy, a transfer over from Texas. They even have a Utah guy, Jackson Powers Johnson, who's ready for a bigger role over there too. We know they got some explosive playmakers on the outside. So I absolutely agree that Oregon is the one that stands out. Like, that's going to be a really tough game because look, Bo Nix is capable of going in, having that type of performance, and this defense will be ready for what Utah has to throw at him. So Michelle, I expect that to be a great game, but I still think one Utah will come out on top, but definitely one I can see them losing.
Yeah, it does. It comes back to, I like Utah at home, and especially when they're also bringing back, a pretty experienced team.
Yes, they are.
It's not anything against Oregon. Last year it was nothing against USC. It's just, if Utah's at home and they have guys that are kind of proven commodities and they've done this before and they've been there and they've done that, and I like what they bring to the table under Kyle Whittingham. Like, I think you can kind of, as a fan, go in feeling pretty good that they're going to perform at home. If you're breaking in a new quarterback, or which is, something that we're going to be watching next year, Utah's going to have a lot more new faces, especially I think on the offensive side of the ball. It might be a little bit of a different story, but this year, again, provided that everything kind of goes the way that we think it will go, guys aren't hurt, the future doesn't come a little bit early. I like Utah's odds at home, and I think they're going to be very tough to beat.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And let's look at the other home games just in general. The first one up is the Florida one. Could Florida come in and beat Utah? Yes, they have the necessary talented players. But at the end of the day, Anthony Richardson's not on this Florida team. Everything we've heard is the quarterback situation is still in a little bit of limbo. Graham Mertz struggled at Wisconsin, didn't look great in their spring game either, so we don't know how the quarterback situation will play out there. As we mentioned, just this Utah team doesn't really lose at home. I don't expect them to lose to a Florida team that I think could be in for a step back year a little bit too. We know they're going to beat Weber State. UCLA is an interesting one just because of Chip Kelly. We know the pedigree and what they played at last season, but you lose DTR, you lose Zach Charbonnet. I expect Utah to beat whoever, no matter who UCLA's starting quarterback is. For those of you who listened to our show yesterday, Spencer McLaughlin made a great point. They will be breaking in a new quarterback at the Power 5 level. And to me, they're not going to be able to get a win at Utah because of that. We know they'll beat Cal. The Oregon one, we just talked about how tough that will be. Utah will beat Arizona State at home. That's one I just don't see how that was a loss. And that would then lead us into our final home game against Colorado. And look, this is one where, once again, I expect Utah to win. I'd be surprised if they fell to the Buffs. I do think the Buffs will be playing their best ball later in the season rather than early on, as Dion gets adjusted to the college level, especially like a Shedeur Sanders, I think gets adjusted to that level too. And the Buffs build that chemistry and come together. But I still expect Utah to win there. As I ran down that kind of list, Michelle, any of those games kind of jump out to you?
I mean, there's potential with UCLA, as you mentioned. It's interesting. I just barely kind of did a breakdown of Arizona State last week. And there's some thought and hope that maybe they'll be better and improve. So, I mean, depending on, if that's another game that's a little bit later in the season, if they find a groove and are clicking, possibly. Say you mentioned Colorado, kind of a similar story. If things kind of really just come together, there's always potential there. Florida, I mean, they bring in talent. I would be surprised. I think Utah has a really bitter taste in their mouth from last year's game, because to be perfectly honest, Utah should have beat Florida last year.
They were the better team. Overall in the season, they were the better team, to your point.
Hands down, we're the better team. Unfortunately, it was kind of 9 times out of 10, you can count on Cam Rising to make that play. That was the 10th time.
Very good.
Not people can't be perfect all the time. And that was just kind of an unfortunate miscue. Otherwise, I think Utah walks away with that win. So I don't think they've forgotten that. And I also
No, they haven't.
I think because Florida fans were chirping so much about nobody's ever seen anything like Florida, which is true. Like, I am not dissing that. Like the sheer size of that crowd and the noise level is incredible. And I've never seen anything like that myself. But I will say Rice Eccles Stadium and Utah's fans, pound for pound, bring the heat too. It's just much smaller. I call it SEC light because it's kind of what it is. It's
very true.
Probably one of the best you're going to get out west, outside of maybe like Oregon. Maybe Washington, if Washington's having a really good season, they can kind of bring the firepower too. But outside of that, like you don't see a whole lot of that out west. And if you do, it is on a much smaller scale. But I think Florida fans will be positively surprised or pleasantly surprised, I should say, that, Utah knows a thing or two about bringing in a good crowd. It's just smaller.
No, yeah, it is a little smaller.
It's just smaller. That's all.
It is going to be very loud, especially being the kickoff. And look, I know it's a Thursday, not a Saturday, but this is a Rice Eccles Stadium that always tends to sell out, and the season opener is going to be no different. So it's going to be fun to see how that game plays out. And if Utah's able to stay at home once again, but we are going to talk about in a moment one of the guys who's going to be essential to their success, and that is Cole Bishop. But first, I want to tell you guys a little bit more about our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting on MLB action on FanDuel and get 10 times your first betting amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to be the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. All caps, no spaces, locked on. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Michelle, one of the guys who's been essential to Utah repeating as Pac-12 champions has been Cole Bishop. Just this last season, he led Utah in tackles overall and made a number of timely plays that don't even show up in the stat sheet in general. And he recently earned praise from Max Chadwick of Pro Football Focus, of PFF, which I believe is Pro Football Focus, but now I'm breaking down what the acronym. Thank you. Yeah, I totally break down what the acronym stands for. Anyways, Bishop is arguably the best downhill safety in college football. And look, that's extremely high praise. As far as I understand downhill safety, or what I've always considered it, is coming down from the safety spot you see in a play, making a tackle, flying in there, making things happen. And that absolutely describes Cole Bishop's game to me. As I mentioned, talking about a guy with 83 tackles in his second season, had 54 before that. He's the guy who's had overall in his career 4.5 sacks, deflected numerous passes on the back end, who can play in the box. He can take on some offensive lineman blockers to free up his teammates. If he flies in, he can force a run into the outside, can make a play closing in. He was one of the surest tacklers on this Utah defense last year, and I absolutely think Cole Bishop is capable of having an outstanding season, Michelle. And I think even by the end of it, could end up on not just some Pac-12 awards, but even some all-conference, or not all-conference, but just national awards, because of the type of season he's capable of having in his third year starting.
Yeah, I think Cole is another kind of prime example of what Utah does really well, which is find a guy that everybody ends up going, how did we miss this guy? Like,
yes.
How is that possible that we did not pick up on the fact that this guy was going to be this good? Cole is interesting. I thought he was really flashy his freshman year. He was quietly good last year. Like he didn't like I think about his freshman year. It felt like he was always making a play like that Rose Bowl. I don't remember if it was an interception or a pass breakup, but very flashy, makes kind of a lot of noise, really stands out. He didn't have so many of those plays, but as you mentioned, he led the team in tackles. And so, that really indicates that this is a guy that understands where the ball is, how to make a play on the ball, how to be in position, how to be kind of where you need to be in order to make those flashy plays. It's going to be interesting to see if he maybe finds a little bit of a balance in year 3 of making the really flashy standout plays that jumps off the film that you don't necessarily have to be an expert to pick up on. Plus the ability to just be in the general vicinity, be in position, be in a place to make those kinds of plays, be prepared to make those plays. And, safety, you're kind of a safety net. So you want your guy to be kind of around, and that doesn't always necessarily that they're the one making the play, but they're just kind of there in case things go south, and can kind of be on cleanup duty.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, I think he does end up kind of marrying those two things. And I'm excited to see. And I love that he's getting some love that, like I said, the experts are kind of picking up on. Yes, he does these flashy things, but he also does these sneaky good things that good players and especially good safeties tend to do, which is be around the play, but not necessarily the one making the play, if that makes sense.
You're 100% right. There's so many moments with Cole Bishop where it's like you watch after the game and it's like, wow, he had like 8 tackles or whatever. But like, man, his impact was so much more than 8 tackles. So it's gonna be exciting to see the kind of season he has. And he's not the only safety I think that's capable of having a great season. And the other guy I'll talk about is Sione Vaki. Look, he's got played a lot in the nickel last season. We'll see if he does that a little more. But from everything we've heard and saw in spring, I believe he was pretty much at the safety spot. We know Nate Ritchie's kind of building up and getting back into things as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he factors into things. But I think Sione Vaki is what say that again, Michelle?
The USC kid that they picked up in the transfer portal is going to be, I mean, when you get a comparison,
right?
Yes. When Bam Allen,
I believe so. Yeah.
I think that's his last name. When you get a comparison to Marquise Blair, a heat-seeking missile, like, I mean, that's a high compliment. So it's going to be interesting to see how Utah again kind of manages some of these guys. What the situational football play is that, maybe dictates who's out there on any given play. And if guys are ready to go, as you mentioned, someone like Nate Ritchie, maybe knocking off some mission rust. The good news is, I mean, he's been constantly talked about as a leader on the team already, which is pretty high praise for someone that's been missing for 2 years, to be able to kind of step in. And I mean, really kind of immediately. I think he was only back a week or two before they made the decisions as far as, who's going to be on the leadership council, and he was on it. So, that says a whole lot. I suspect it didn't sound like it was anything terribly serious that was keeping him out. They were just being slow and cautious and careful, which, I mean, if you have younger guys that you need to kind of throw out there and get more experience for, like a Sione Vaki, then why wouldn't you just kind of do that and let your kind of proven guy get his feet back into it a little bit? But yeah, Utah has some options.
They absolutely have great safety depth, whether it's Vaki, Bishop, and you mentioned Allen, Ritchie. There's just a ton of guys who are going to have an opportunity to make plays for this team. And as I was saying too, I'm really excited for Sione Vaki to get more of a role, because just when you watch the kind of game he had against USC in the Pac-12 championship game, like he was made for the moment. He was ready for it. And guys like that, I just love to trust and roll with and see more of them. And I really think he's going to have an exceptional year in coverage. And I think he's got a really good chance to lead this team in interceptions just with his ball skills overall on the back end. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, and where both Utah safeties kind of end up on the all Pac-12 teams in general. And another thing that's been really cool to monitor and see play out is Utah Gymnastics right now, Michelle, which the Red Rocks have taken a trip overseas as they've gone to South Korea. And while abroad, they had the opportunity to compete against Korean teams in exhibition matches. They've also gotten to teach some local gymnastic classes with some youth, to host meet and greets with a student aspiring athletes trying to pursue career at the collegiate level in the United States, and explore kind of the campus city and their surroundings over in South Korea. That comes to us from the Pac-12 Network's website, all that information there. And I think this is great for not just the Utah gymnasts and coaches to be able to go over there. I'm sure a lot of them seeing a new part of the world that they haven't seen before, but just to be able to grow the impact of the game globally, give so many people the opportunity to see what these amazing Utah gymnasts can do, because these are not just your average college gymnasts, obviously. So being able to watch them in person and learn from them is a great luxury and opportunity. And it sounds like it's a great opportunity for them to give back. You could kind of talk to and mentor, as they said, some of these aspiring college athletes, how you want to navigate recruiting and all the other things that can be not easy to navigate in general. So I think this is great that Utah Gymnastics is growing the game globally overall of gymnastics. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity for the Red Rocks and South Korea as well, getting to meet these exceptional girls.
Yeah, this is the first team for Utah that's traveled overseas since 2017. I'm going to assume it was basketball was the last team to head over. I wasn't able to find that information, but I think
Sounds right.
it seems like it was
Just say that.
basketball that got to take a trip overseas. But to be honest, from like, in theory, basketball was a really great idea. And I think 2017 was like the last good Utah men's basketball team that we've had. That was the team that I believe ended up going to the finals in the NIT, if I'm not mistaken. But as far as branding goes, I don't think you have a better branded team than the Red Rocks to like take out and about and to kind of showcase and really, and especially I think in a place like Asia, like gymnastics is kind of big in Asia, and for reasons, I mean, good reasons. You typically, they're the right size and some of that kind of stuff that you typically see out of gymnasts who tend to run a little bit smaller and whatnot because of the things that they do. But I think that's awesome. I think that's an awesome opportunity for both parties. And especially, again, the University of Utah is trying to grow their brand overall. And part of that's having this Asia campus. And so what better way to kind of help bridge that gap and maybe garner more global partnership than to bring a team on the road that is going to have high appeal to that area. And it was also kind of interesting and cool because Tom Farden actually was born in South Korea and was adopted later in Minnesota, as I came to find out, kind of reading through all of that. So I think that was kind of a special thing for him to kind of go back to his roots and get to see and experience, where he started out before he ended up where he is. And I think that's also, again, another special connection for that area to see that, someone that grew up there had an opportunity to come and do something really big through the University of Utah. So.
Yeah, that is a great point about the impact that can be made. And it's such an awesome opportunity for all the Utah gymnasts who get to go over there. And it's really cool. And like you said, something too, I hope that other athletic programs are able to experience and be able to do as well. I don't know how the scheduling of these trips works, but I'd love for like the Utah women's basketball team. I think they're very deserving of an opportunity like this. And as you said, eventually the men's basketball team can get to that point as well, where these trips are really exciting. I actually believe the Utah basketball team actually has one coming up eventually.
Spain.
Yep, going to Spain.
We're going to Spain.
So Utes, so Utes traveling abroad, and it's going to be interesting to see what, of course, the Utah gymnastics team can do once they get back to Utah coming up in early January 2024. And then, of course, with what the Utah football team is able to do starting in just a little over we're a little 57 days, I think I saw, Michelle, at the time we're recording this.
Ooh, I don't know about the day count, but
I thought I saw Landon King posted that today or yesterday. So that's where I'm trying to. So if I'm wrong, I blame Landon. It's
his fault.
Yeah,
transfer's fault.
Oh, exactly. Michelle, if people want more Utah coverage, though, where should they head over to?
Yeah, I mean, definitely keep your eyes peeled on KSLSports.com. I'm actually taking a bit of a week off in the ramp up to Pac-12 Media Day, which is coming up in about 2 weeks. And then, of course, from there, it's pretty much full steam ahead through fall camp. And then before you know it, we're going to be gathering together at Rice Eccles Stadium for kickoff against Florida at the end of August. But we will have all the coverage you need there. And then, of course, continue to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Bodkin KSL Sports.
A lot of fun stuff coming up. And Michelle, we appreciate you joining us on your week off.
No problem. Love doing it.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes, but we'll be back tomorrow with more Utah football content.